For those of you that don't know me, my name is Bruce Davis. I run the Educational Foundation at Germanna Community College, and we very much appreciate you all coming today. We're in the early stages of celebrating the 50th anniversary of Germanna Community College. So we're very proud of that we've made it 50 years, and we hope to make it another 50. So enjoy your lunch, and we'll begin the program. Thank you. Dr. Gullickson, the president of Germanna Community College. She's in her third year as president, and she's had an immeasurable influence on the college and the community. And it's my great pleasure to get to introduce my boss, Dr. Janet Gullickson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's a real privilege to be able to welcome you here today. We are very, very fortunate to have former Congressman Tom Davis with us, especially a couple days after the election, and we're very fortunate to have you as well. Let me tell you about Germanna. Excuse me, just for a second. About 12,000 students. We grew again this year. Last year we grew the most of any community college in the state of Virginia. We were just named this week as one of the top 150 colleges in the country. Wallet Hub named us the top community college in Virginia, and we're on our way. Recently we just received a national certification by the Department of Homeland Security as well as the National Security Administration for our cybersecurity program, our engineering program. We're looking for ways to expand this. Our engineering program is one of the highest regarded in the country. We're also looking for ways to expand into the Stafford area. Last year we grew by 1,000 credits, or I should say this year we grew by 1,000 credits already up in Stafford. And so we have lots of opportunities, a few challenges, and all good news. The best thing about Germanna is it costs how much to get a degree at Germanna? $10,000. $10,000. So those of you like Mr. Sneed, who has a son at Amherst, probably on a full ride. But nevertheless, if you had to do the ticket yourself, that's quite a substantial difference. And so we really encourage all of you to think about the students who don't have access to the institutions that maybe you did, and the needs for them to have an education as well, particularly in our current age. Yesterday I was in a class observing a business class on the invitation of the instructor, and half of the class were students of color, which is pretty amazing. We are the access point for immigrant students, for students who are not necessarily part of the mainstream, for all students. We're also the access point for students who have to be rehabilitated after going to Virginia Tech, but that's a different story. And we often do, and we're proud of them as well. You see in front of you our 50th anniversary, and Bruce is going to talk about this a little bit, but our little bag with goodies in it. But let me just tell you that for 50 years, Germanna has been doing a wonderful job in this region educating students. But we are looking ahead to the next 50 years, and this whole year we're going to focus on the area of plan giving, the idea that all of us have something to leave behind. Now, many of us have children who have been successful because we helped them. But there are other opportunities to help others' children who may not have the resources that you have. And Bruce will talk to you about that. One more thing. I heard Tom at an event, and I thought, you should run for president. I did, Tom. And then I thought, because you talked about John Hickenlooper, I thought you and John Hickenlooper would be a great ticket. But anyway, we'll have Tom talk to us in a minute. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy your food, and I'm just so proud to know you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. G. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you former Congressman Tom Davis. Tom was born in Minot, North Dakota, moved to Fairfax pretty early in life. He was educated at the United States Capitol Page School. He's a graduate of Amherst College. He's a graduate of the University of Virginia Law School. He also attended officer candidate school in the U.S. Army, and he spent 8 years in the National Guard and the U.S. Army Reserve. After that, from 1980 to 1994, he was elected to the Fairfax Board of Supervisors and was chairman from 1991 to 94, and he served from 80 to 94. So that's a long time to be taking complaints about potholes. He went on to serve 7 terms in the United States Congress, which is pretty remarkable. He chaired the National Republican Congressional Committee from 1999 till 2003. He chaired the Committee on Government Reform from 2003 to 2007. Since leaving office, he's been president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. He teaches at George Mason University and is a partner in the law firm of Holland and Knight in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Congressman Tom Davis.
Well, thank you. The most important part of my resume is I left Congress undefeated and unindicted, and I'm just really proud of that these days. I am the rector at George Mason University. We're 38,000 students. We have several campuses up in Northern Virginia. We really treasure our relationship with the community college. We take a lot of your students. They perform well. 40% of our graduates at George Mason start in the community college. I think what's important to understand is for a lot of newcomers to this country, a lot of immigrant families, this is their first step on the ladder of opportunity, is being able to go to community college, something that's affordable, and transfer in. Also for students who are late bloomers, maybe didn't do very well in high school, but want to straighten out starting at community college and then going on and getting a 4-year degree. But finally, a lot of the jobs now at Dahlgren and at our tech companies in Northern Virginia, you don't need a college degree, but you need the training. And what we found out is that community colleges are basically the ones that are offering this training at affordable rates to get people and move them into our workforce and keep our economy moving. Unfortunately, when the states decided to get into the healthcare business, something had to give. And what we found out is, my wife was in the legislature for 10 years. She was in the House and the Senate from Fairfax. Originally 2% of the state money went to Medicaid, and higher education got the bulk of it. But as things have changed now, 23% of the state budget's Medicaid. And as you move into that area, basically they've had to cut higher education loose, and our reimbursements aren't what they used to be. George Mason, just a few years ago, over 70% of our dollars came from the state. Now it's about 17%. Community college are seeing that same cut. So to make a difference, to continue to serve the people we're serving, we have to rely on private philanthropy, and we have to look at other innovative ways to make it work. I will say this, I have switched most of my giving from Amherst, which gave me a full scholarship, and I was grateful for, and long past paid that, but I switched it now to Mason, where it makes a difference. These other schools have plenty of money. These schools here are still on the margins. Amherst is a school that prides itself on who they don't take, very selective, less than 1 out of 10 people who apply get in. We, at the community college and at Mason, we pride ourselves on who we do take, giving people an opportunity that wouldn't have it otherwise. And many of these people flourish, go on to do wonderful things for our community. So this is basically our first line. So as you take a look at your opportunities to give over the long term, what I do is, I'm 70 years old now, so I have to take Social Security. But in my 401ks, as I have to take money out under law, I just move that straight into philanthropy, and I don't have to pay taxes. I don't know if anybody's that old in this room, but when you get there, that's a good way to do it. Secondly is you can do it through your wills. Just leave something there so you leave a legacy behind. I'm sure you have plenty of naming opportunities if you really want to get a name legacy.
I will rename myself.
There you go. So I want to put that plug in before we start, because if you really want to make a difference, this is where you make a difference. If you really want people talk about the wealth gap, you're going to close it through education. You're going to close it basically through people who have skills versus unskilled laborers, which, frankly, is the economy gets more into the tech sector, so unskilled labor these are the folks that are left behind. And this is basically our first line of defense against. So I'll put that plug in to start. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is, I went to Amherst, which is, I understand your son is there. I went up there, the class in the fall of '67, and we went up a week early for orientation. And we started these bull sessions. They gave us a reading thing. And you got to know, we were a class of 300, you got to know your fellow students. We all thought we were pretty hot-headed. Most of us had really good SATs, we had good grades, but there was one kid that was apparent from day one that his SATs weren't as high as everybody else's, his grades, in fact, this guy was just kind of plain dumb. He was a heck of a football player, however, and his name was Moose McGee. But the Moose had something the rest of us didn't have. He had instinct. And I will tell you, my experience in life, whether it's in sports or politics or business, is instinct is something you can't buy. You either have it or you don't. Instinct's the ability to make the right decision with a limited amount of information in a quick period of time. The Moose had this instinct. He could walk into one of these complex lectures, not understand a word that was being said, but he would hone in on a few buzzwords the professor was throwing out. He would dutifully record these buzzwords in his notebook and regurgitate them in some fashion in the final exam. Not always the appropriate syntax, but at least they were there. And if you grade enough papers, you give him the benefit of the doubt and he gets a C-. He walks off the stage, class of 71, dead last in the class, but it wasn't cum laude or anything, but at least he got the diploma. So you wonder, how does a guy like this do in life? Well, at Amherst we have an alumni bulletin, comes out 4 times a year, and in a class of 300, to make the alumni bulletin, you don't need to do much. I mean, if you get married, you're in. For the first 10 years, Moose never made the bulletin. Now, in my class, I had David Eisenhower, who was the son-in-law of the president. I had 2 guys who had TV shows. We actually had 3 people that era went to the Super Bowl. We had Scott Turow, who won a Pulitzer just a few years out of college. This is in the first 10 years. I went back for my 10th reunion. I'm already a county supervisor in Fairfax. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. Get out of the car. I'm 100 feet from the car, and one of my fraternity brothers said, "Hey, Davis," he said, "did you hear? Moose McGee's coming back for the reunion." I said, "No kidding, what's he?" I said, "I'm a poor guy, you know." So we strategized how we weren't going to embarrass the Moose by talking about our success. We got our comeuppance about an hour later. This chauffeur-driven Rolls Royce comes into town, and surprisingly, the Moose is not driving. He's in the back seat. He's got a driver. He's got a couple of little Mooses with him now. He's got a beautiful wife. Takes a suite of rooms at the Lord Jeffrey, which is the nicest hotel in town. And the class did. It was a room about this size. It was pretty full. We just all went around the room real quick and talked about what we were doing. It comes to the Moose, and he said, "This college meant a lot to me," and he drops a $300,000 check to the alumni fund. This is 1981. Yeah, that's a lot of money in 1981. Still a lot of money, right? If you're in our business. You could have heard a pin drop. Well, it's a college reunion night, so it's an open bar. It's a long night. And I was back at the bar a couple hours later, getting, I think, my 5th Diet Coke of the night for the record. But the Moose was back there, and one of the brothers had imbibed a little too much and felt a little emboldened. And he said, "Moose," he said, "we're all doing pretty well." He said, "You just wrote a 6-figure check for the alumni fund." He said, "You were the dumbest guy in the class." He said, "How do you make that kind of money?" The Moose illustrated with this answer, folks, why it's instinct, not intellect, that gets you through life. He said, "Well, guys," he said, "I had a few bucks when I graduated from college, so I bought into this small company that makes these gasket heads." He said, "We found out we could make these gasket heads for $1 a piece, but we could sell them for $5 a piece." He said, "You know, you just can't beat that 4% profit." So what I want to do today is kind of share some of my instincts with you in terms of what's going on politically. Why are things the way they are? Maybe you think they're great, maybe they aren't, but let me give you kind of a demonstration. First of all, what's happening in Washington is it's not just Washington. It's going on around the world. It is caused by the rapidity of change in the globe. History teaches us, it's called the law of relative deprivation, that as things are getting improved, you get more revolutions because of rising expectations. And we see this today. As things are moving very quickly, both culturally, economically, socially, you have some group at the front end think it's not fast enough and they want more and more. And the people at the tail end, they're dug in. They say, "Where do I stand?" Well, their status is threatened. It's just this accordion effect, a very polarizing effect. We see wealth disparity. Immigration is not just a U.S. problem. In Europe, they've had to cope with it. Brand new parties coming. People reacted to changing demographics. Globalization process is a sorting out process with winners and losers. Certainly climate change is an issue that's offering a lot of challenges for some industries over others. And finally, the communications revolution, where politics is not caught up with the way they communicate. When we grew up, it was ABC, NBC, CBS. Now everybody's an announcer and has their own platform, and which I'll get to in a minute. But politics is not caught up with this new communications. Democracy is being challenged around the globe, and again, political disruption. If you think the U.S. is messed up right now, look at Brexit in the U.K. They got we have no idea where that election is going to turn out at this point, but it's turned parties on their head. France, Macron was a fourth party. It's a brand new party he ran on and won and took part of it. His numbers are lower than President Trump's are in this country at this point as he tries to govern this change. Italy, you've got the five-star movement. We've watched Ukraine, Mexico, across the globe. You can list the countries where there's basically politically things have been thrown up in the air. Next slide. So let's talk about, I wrote a book, I was a Republican campaign chair in 2 cycles. I wrote a book with Martin Frost, who was a Democratic campaign chair, just about the origins of polarization in the U.S. and what we call in political science the ideological sorting of the parties. When I grew up, there were liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats, and that's been completely sorted out. 3 macro factors to understand the polarization in America. Number one, most members now run in pretty safe districts. Even with the General Assembly races this year, about 80 of the members, November was just a constitutional formality. The primary is their major race. The reason for, and so they pay their time and their attention to their party base, to their primary voters, because that's who elects them. Again, November doesn't make any difference because they're in a one-party district. And that primary voters are a thin ideological slice of the electoral pie. They don't reward compromise, they punish compromise because they think they're right and the other side is wrong. That occurred, the major cause for that is not gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is a cause, but it's relatively minor. The major cause is what we call residential sorting patterns, as you saw in that Virginia map. People who think alike live in like-minded enclaves. In my neighborhood in Fairfax, if you put up a Trump sign in the last election, it was a hate crime. But if you go out 40 miles, people were putting up their own Trump signs. I mean, people like to live around people like themselves. Put it another way, and I gave this speech in Arlington, I said, look, if you live in a county with a Whole Foods, they probably voted for Hillary Clinton. If you live in a county with a Cracker Barrel, they probably voted for Trump. I swear, this lady says, don't you mean Cracker Barrel? And I just said, look, I rest my case. You're in your bubble. The media business models have changed. This started in 1986 when the Federal Communications did away with something called the Fairness Doctrine, where you had to show both sides. And radio station owners said, well, hey, you don't have to show both sides anymore. So what they did is talk radio sprang up, and you could tune in all day, you could hear Rush Limbaugh and a group of people on the right, or you could tune in to hear left, you get your worldviews validated, you felt pretty good about yourself, and you start walking around. You're right, and the other guys don't know what's going on. This was replicated by cable news. Has anybody ever watched Fox and MSNBC on the same night? They're different planets. I don't consider this serious news. These are entertainment and successful business models. But they feed their readership or their viewership what they want to hear. And that's why people tune in, to get their worldviews validated. And now, how do most people get their news? Right here, right? Get it over the internet. Well, what we call the crap to content ratio on the internet is just exceptionally high. There's no filters on the internet. No vetting. You can say or do anything, and it just so happens most of us have either Facebook friends or get the news that kind of conforms to what we want to hear. And so everybody's walking around, and I can't believe my neighbor's so stupid, or probably walking around in their own bubbles. And then finally, the money in politics. When the Congress passed what's called McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform, all that did is it said parties and candidates can't take soft money. And those of us that oppose the law said, wait a minute, that's a noble purpose in itself, but where do you think this money's going to go? Do you think this money's going to disappear? Let's think about where we're driving this money. And of course, with the help of a couple court cases, Citizens United and the Speech Now case out of the DC Circuit, that money has moved from the parties, which were a centering force in American politics for 200 years, out to the wings, who play in primaries, or basically enforcement mechanisms for people who don't toe the party line. So just quickly to sum up, if you look at the districts have gone from centered competitive districts out to here, if the way people receive their news has gone from factual vetted news out to here, and if the money has gone from the center out to here, what do you expect? And the answer is we have very polarized politics today. So next slide. We have a chapter in our book called All Politics is No Longer Local. In point of fact, most people now are voting party, not person. I put this chart up to illustrate it. I took Charlie Cook, had a report, and we've revised it, but if you look at the left, these are 14 states plus the District of Columbia that voted Democrat for president 7 straight times. The Senate lineup in those states is 28-0. Menendez in New Jersey last time had federal indictments. He had all kinds of ethics complaints, very vulnerable. His unfavorable higher than his favorable, he won by 10 points. Why? New Jersey wanted to elect a Democrat. They were voting to put Schumer in charge rather than Mitch McConnell. On the Republican side, it's 25-1 in those states that have voted Republican. The one Democrat is renting the seat, Jones from Alabama. That's because the Republican candidate was a guy named Judge Roy Moore. Anybody remember him? Yes. Probably the worst Senate candidate. By the way, he's back. I don't think he has a chance. I don't think he'll get through the primary process this time. But even then, Moore almost won with all of the problems that he had that I won't recapitulate right now. But we just see this straight ticket voting pattern for people. This is what we call parliamentary behavior. People are voting the party, not the person. And the end result of that is when members come to Washington now, or to Richmond, they behave like it's a parliamentary system. But we're not a parliamentary system. We're a balance of power system. We relied on compromise and goodwill to get things done. But it means that today, in a parliamentary style behavior, the president's party in Congress is just an appendage of the executive branch. They're there to protect their quarterback. They under-investigate him, they protect him. The minority party no longer views themselves as a minority shareholder in government. They're the opposition party. And we see this play out all the time. I chaired the major investigative committee in the House, and what my comments have been, yes, when the president's party's in charge, they under-investigate, and when the other party's in charge, they over-investigate. And that's just the way it's gone now for the last 30 years, getting a little more pronounced each time. But parliamentary behavior and a balance of power structure. Our government wasn't designed for this. By the way, this even goes now to judgeships. If you look at the judges they appoint, there's almost an ideological litmus test. So you get a Trump decision that goes to the courthouse, and if it goes for Trump, I'll tell you who nominated that judge. If it goes against him, I can tell you 9 times out of 10 I'm going to be right. That these judges now are as political as the legislators. Not the way the founders designed it. Next slide. This is the map of the last election. As you can see, Hillary Clinton got almost 3 million more votes. They just weren't in the right places. Carried California by 4.5 million votes. Democrats waste their votes because they live in these enclaves where on top of each other in urban areas where they overproduce votes. Republicans are more scattered around. Somebody said, well, what advice would you give Democrats? I said, they need a massive relocation program because their votes are concentrated. These blue counties in the South for Hillary are all African-American majority counties. You see the blue counties in rural areas in Texas and Colorado. For the most part, these are Hispanic or Indian counties as you move forward. But 84% of the real estate is Republican. But a majority of votes are Democrats, but we're an electoral vote system. And like it or not, it takes 38 states to change that. That's just unlikely. Next slide. I put this up that the other thing is the largest voting bloc in the country are independents. But independents don't vote in primaries. In some states, they're prohibited from voting. In other states, they just don't bother to vote in primaries because they consider themselves independents. Massachusetts, a heavy Democratic state, 52% of registered voters are independents. In that state, you can pick your primary if you're an independent. But the reality is independent voters don't really like either party. But as you can see, the last 4 times that they have had a chance to make corrections, they have done it. So in 1992, the Democrats, 1993, Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and the voters said, well, we're going to balance government. 2006, Republicans controlled everything. The voters said, we're going to balance government. And it switches each time. Independent voters basically will take a midterm election to put a check on the president rather than giving them a blank check. And that's kind of the political system as it is today. We get that now. Looking at the Senate, next time everyone talks about the Senate races, the Senate will be on the bubble. 22 Republican senators up, only 12 Democratic senators up. But I ranked this by Trump percentages in the last election. The vulnerability for Republicans comes right about here. Those are the seats. Maybe you start in Iowa, but that's it. Above that, no chance. Again, the Alabama seat likely to go Republican. So if you move Alabama to the Republican side, Democrats need to pick up 4 in here. It's possible. It's possible depending how the race goes. So the Senate is kind of on the bubble. I mean, if it were today, I think Republicans probably hold it. But a year is an eternity. We have no idea where things are going. Democrats have the distinct possibility of picking up the Senate. My judgment, the House is likely to stay Democratic, at least under the current atmospherics that we are seeing. But here's why it's important. The new governance model is, and this happened, it's been moving this way for a long time, and it really was established under President Obama. Once the Republicans took the House in 2010, his legislative agenda was dead. And I think he said at that point, well, I'm not going to stop on my campaign practices. So my promises. So he starts doing things through executive order and regulation, and genuinely moving the ball slowly in some of these directions with the pen. Not having congressional support, but doing what we could as an executive, and then filling the judgeships, which until Republicans took the Senate, many of these were sustained. So the Iran nuclear deal was not a treaty, couldn't have gotten through the Senate, so it can be erased with the pen. Paris Climate Accords wasn't a treaty, it was the same kind of thing. The XL pipeline, a number of the regulatory issues coming out of EPA and the Labor Department. And when Trump came in, he just took out the eraser, and he erased the kinds of things, but also he had no legislative agenda. It still takes 60 votes to pass anything in the Senate. So Obama, for a brief period of time, had 60 votes in the Senate. It's the only way they got Obamacare. And the story of Obamacare is an interesting story. They had 60 votes. They passed, I don't know if you remember this, Christmas Eve, they passed the Senate bill. Now, this bill was put together quickly, so the members could get out of town and enjoy a little bit of Christmas and come back after New Year's. And as happens when you put together a bill like that, and it had some sweeteners in it to get some Democratic voters that were nervous about voting for it. It had something called the Cornhusker Kickback. It had the Gatorade, the Louisiana Purchase that went to the senators in those states. It gave them at least some bragging rights in the bill to give them favorable funding formulas for health care. But the bill didn't really match. There were duplications. They had paragraphs left off. It didn't connect. That's okay. That's generally the way bills pass the first time. In fact, my experience in the House is the longer these things stay on the floor, the worse they get. But you pass it, and then you get it into a conference where you get the members who know something about this, and the administration staff working together to get a bill that really works and can become a law. Funny thing happened on the way to that here is Scott Brown got elected to the Senate in Massachusetts in a special election, and the Democrats lost their 60th vote. They only had 59 votes. So they couldn't get it to conference. Republicans wouldn't let it to conference. Republicans wouldn't even give them a technical corrections bill. So they were stuck with a very imperfect bill. And then they faced this dilemma. And I remember talking at the time to Rahm Emanuel, who's a good friend. He was chief of staff. And Rahm said, maybe we ought to do this thing in chewable bites. But there were some other people who said, no. He said, look, I don't want to wait another 20 years. We'll go with an imperfect bill and try to fix it later. And that's what they did. Of course, it ended up costing them the House 2 years later. It cost them the Senate a little bit later. But the bottom line on this is they knew it wasn't perfect. But let's get this out there and we'll try to fix it later. And despite efforts to repeal it, court decisions, the bill basically has stayed. It's a very different bill than was passed now, and some of the mandates have gone away and the like. But that's kind of the sausage making. But what it illustrates is how important it is, if you don't have 60 votes in the Senate, getting anything done. Now, Here's what could happen. Elizabeth Warren, for one, has said she wants to abolish the filibuster in the Senate, which means you get 50. That'll bring us even more into parliamentary politics at that point, where with 50 votes in the vice president, you can jam through anything. That'll break 150 years of Senate tradition. Traditionally, to amend the rules, you need to be able to get a supermajority. But what's happened now, and both parties have done it, is they just get a ruling from the chair and sustain that ruling, and the courts won't touch it because it's the political thicket. So more to come on this. But what we see is basically devolving into a parliamentary behavior in Congress and the presidency in a system that wasn't designed to do this. And it just hasn't worked very well, and it ends up being a more polarizing factor. Is that the last slide? Oh, again. So this shows what's happened also, again, just to prove the parliamentary model. This is a 100-year chart, but basically we're seeing no compromise in Congress. Everybody goes back to their corners. I'll say a word about impeachment. I was there for the Clinton impeachment, very controversial at the time. I was in the Republican leadership at the time. I actually argued against taking it up. I said, this is not a political winner for us, guys, so we need to do this. But I lost that battle and brought it up. And at the end of the day, I voted to impeach on the two grounds, basically on the theory that Congress is there to set standards, and lying under oath is a felony. The president should lie under oath to deposition, but that the president should be held to the same standard as everybody else. Now remember, I was the one who did the steroid hearings in baseball. I chaired those. He took Roger Clemens to court for lying under oath. Took him through 2 jury trials. Miguel Tejada pled guilty to lying to our investigators. So I've always taken those things seriously. But at the end of the day, after all these arguments, and you could argue this either way, I think reasonable people could disagree to this rise to the level of impeachment or whatever, is it was a party line vote. You had 5 Democrats voted for maybe 1 article of impeachment, for any article of impeachment out of the whole House, and only 3 Republicans didn't vote for impeachment on any article. So it was basically parliamentary behavior even then. But we see the same thing now. On the one hand, the Republicans who argue, no, Congress is there to set standards. When it's coming with Trump, they're on the other side. Say, well, this doesn't rise. And Democrats who were willing to apologize for Clinton, and say this doesn't rise a little bit, are now are taking the opposite tack. And what are we saying? A party line vote. We saw a party line vote the other day. 2 Democrats crossed over and voted with the Republicans, both from heavy Trump districts. I did a news thing this morning. These members are going to follow their constituents. They're going to follow their primary voters. That's what's counting. That's what we're seeing on this thing. Aside from all the facts and everything else, the fact maybe reasonable people can disagree about this, everybody tends to go back to their corners. Now, you never know what's going to be found down the way. In the Nixon case, it collapsed, but that was a different time and a different era, and you had the president's, who knows where it goes. But if that gives you kind of a background in terms of what to look for at this point. These are some of the executive orders. I've talked about it before, Keystone Pipeline. These were some of the things that Trump has overturned. The Iran nuclear deal, the MC Jerusalem, contractor disclosure laws, just a whole ton of things. Again, having the presidency and the Senate, is how you run the country now. The House irrelevant if you're not getting legislation through. The new resistance, and this is brand new, this is very Trump-centric, is we're seeing more and more lawsuits, multi-state lawsuits against the president. And I've compared this going back in history. We're seeing more and more lawsuits filed to stop the president. And of course, where's the Senate spent 3/4 of their time the first 2-3 years? They spent them on running judges through. In fact, they just changed the rules even though they changed the filibuster rules from 60 to 50 for judges, Democrats did that. You still 30 hours of debate. Republicans just changed that and removed from the chair to 2 hours. So they're moving these judges through to sustain them. Why? Because the assault now isn't coming legislatively. It's coming, legislation stop. It's coming in the courts. And we're seeing more and more multi-party, multi-state lawsuits against the administration. Just a few years ago, the states' rights states were Alabama and Mississippi. Not anymore. The new states' rights states are California, New York, Hawaii, those places. So it comes around, goes around. I think that's it. So that's kind of the good news from Washington. I'd like to talk about there still is one thing that brings Washington together, and that's the Washington Nationals. And I'm going to illustrate this. I was out there Friday night for the first World Series game in the city since the 1930s. I got one of these seats way up, down the line, but I saw there was a seat down behind the dugout that was empty. It was empty at the end of the first inning, empty at the end of the second inning. So I took a chance, and in the third inning, I was able to sneak down, and it was next to an elderly woman. Anybody sitting here? She said, well, as a matter of fact, they are. I said, would you mind if I sat here for the rest of the game? She said, no, please, I could use the company. I said, I can't believe there's an empty seat here. These seats are scouted for literally thousands of dollars. I thought. And she said, well, that's my husband's ticket. We've been season ticket holders since Washington came, since the Nationals moved here from Montreal. And she said, and we've missed very few games, but I know he would have wanted me to be here, but he died. I said, damn, I'm so sorry. He said, well, he would have wanted me to be here. I said, I understand. I said, but don't you have a friend or a relative that could have used the other ticket? And she said, no. She said, they're all at the funeral. So anyway, thanks for letting me come out and just share some thoughts on this. And I hope you can remember Germanna Community College. You're doing great work. I think their brightest days are ahead, but they need the help. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. We very much appreciate you coming to spend time with us today. I know there's attorneys in the room, and I know how they love billable hours. And you're an attorney, and you just graciously come down on your own time, and we very much appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, give them a big round of applause.
They asked if I believe in free speech. I said, yeah. They said, would you give a free speech? So that's all.